welcome to The Get-In, the official podcast for Central Youth Theatre. I hope you've had a great start to the new year. Here at CYT HQ, it's been a pretty busy start, and we've actually had the first show of the 24-25 season, and that was Dickensian Disaster, a murder mystery, which showed at the Arena Theatre in Wolverhampton on Sunday the 2nd of Feb. And I'm joined here today by the director, Simon Quinn, to talk to us about that.
Hello.
So start us off, tell us, how has it been working on Dickensian Disaster? What's the process been like?
It's been a lot of fun. It's also been very new in terms of the guys who've been participating. Didn't really understand it, and obviously so, the convention of the murder mystery. So basically what we have is a drama scenario, or a short playlet, if you like, of a murder, shall we say, or a misdemeanor, a crime that involves many characters. Normally what happens after that is, what you tend to have is another 45 minutes where the audience interact with each other to try and work out who the murderer is. But because this was part of the Wolverhampton Literature Festival, we had to understand the conventions of a quick get in and a quick get out. So we had to shorten that piece, whereby all the suspects gave a little line or so about their character and why they could have done it or why they couldn't have done it. And then a show of hands from the audience who they thought was, and who we actually revealed was, the murderer. So in terms of the first part, which is the main bulk of it, the first 40 minutes, what they see is the drama unfold and the murderous intent right at the end, and then a short interactive bit with the audience to conclude the show, so to speak.
And the Dickensian angle, that's in the characters, isn't it? So they're all characters from...
That's right, yes.
Yeah.
Because it was part of the Literature Festival, it was decided that we needed to focus on a classic interpretation. So what I decided to do was bring together several Dickens characters from several of his books and novels, so to speak, and merge them into this fictional setting. So what we had Uriah Heep, who's the slimy bookkeeper from David Copperfield.
Yeah.
And then we brought in other characters from other books, such as Bleak House, Oliver Twist, so Miss Havisham, Lady Deadlock, Nancy, of course, from Oliver Twist, and several other characters. And we had a storyteller as well. Now, that storyteller was the ghost of Edwin Drood, because, as you know, Edwin Drood was the unfinished work of Charles Dickens. Yeah. And what he sets out is, he actually relays to the audience, you thought I was the only unfinished work, but actually here's another unfinished work, which is, there was actually a murder of Uriah Heep. So he ghost tells it, and he's portrayed as a knife grinder, because on the other side of the stage is Madame Defarge from A Tale of Two Cities. So that was the general idea. And so, as I say, what I wanted was a sort of macabre looking, but very humorous as well, a sort of macabre visuality. So the ensemble cast would portray butchers, bakers, candlestick makers, how they discarded all their carcasses of meat into the Thames, and how at downstage we saw this little swindling act from Uriah Heep, how he tries to blackmail Miss Havisham and Lady Deadlock. Then we have Mr. Bumble come in from The Beadle of the Poorhouse from Oliver Twist, who casts their eye across the rest of the ensemble, who at one section portray the alehouse where Nancy entertains them all. Then they become very posh aristocrats at the home of Mr. Scrooge. Now, as you and I know, Mr. Scrooge is this person from A Christmas Carol who hated Christmas and hated anything jovial. But actually, this Mr. Scrooge is the one who has the newfound spirit. So it's kind of turning things on their head a little bit.
Cool, some really nice ideas there.
Hopefully,
I was interested with it being Dickens. How would you describe Dickens' style, first of all, literary wise, And then how did you use that in the process with the actors
Well,
and the young people?
Dickens, of course, is very much a great storyteller, which sounds obvious, but it's not always, which is why I had Drew there sort of relaying what his author, i.e., Dickens, wanted him to say to the audience for this unfolding drama. They're it's very, very much based on big characters. So, very much what I wanted to get across was the subversion of the working classes and how their relationship differed with the upper echelons, if you like. But what I wanted to really focus on was the big characters coming across. So yeah, hopefully paying homage to a lot of the individuality of those characters within his novels, but coming together in this brand new story.
And so what I wanted to move on to now really is when I look over the past season of work that we've done at CYT, it has been mainly classics.
Yeah,
Like over the last year, we've had Three Sisters from Chekhov, we've
Yeah.
had Twelfth Night from Shakespeare, we've had The Crucible in more sort of recent history by Arthur
Little Women
Miller.
coming up.
Little Women's coming up,
Yeah.
the novel by Louisa May Alcott. We've had this, Dickensian Disaster. We have the school tours, which was, like
Yeah,
I say,
yeah.
Christmas Carol, Macbeth,
Spectacles.
and Spectacles.
Yeah.
So a lot of the work that we do at CYT at the moment seems to revolve around the classics. And so I was interested in this question. Is there a place still for classics in theatre?
I think so. I think if you've got a lot of these classics that are, whether you agree or not, that are based on the school curriculum, for instance, like you mentioned about the school packages, I think the way we do them through a good sense of theatricality, I would hope that the young people who would take part in those dramas get a clearer understanding of what those characters and what those books and what their objectives are, um, rather than just studying the book and reading the
Yeah.
book. I think the two they go hand in hand. We've said before there's an inextricable link between literature and drama. That has to be.
Education, I think sometimes it can
Yeah.
end up being academic or
Too
historical.
academic. Yeah, that's right.
But really, there's the nice feeling that I always like to see it as when you read these classics, like for me, obviously, I'm a big fan of Shakespeare.
Yeah.
And part of that is that we can tend to believe that these people's lives, like in the Elizabethan age, they lived so different to us.
Yeah.
They didn't have the same amenities we do. We didn't have the same comforts
Yeah.
or values. But then you read these pieces and you realise that even with all that separating us, there's a lot that draws us closer together. And so I like to see it as this wisdom being passed down.
Yeah, and I think
From the previous generations, and it's
absolutely.
there's a lot of
think-
really key lessons there.
I think the practicality is understanding what times might have been like. And it's
Yeah.
difficult to cast your mind back to those times because we weren't around then. But to understand what London would have been like in Dickens' time, he was ascribing all these notes, all these stories to the outside eye and ear. But guys, this is what London's like. And I wasn't or not a massive understanding of Dickens's work. So I did quite a bit of research, and sort of realised that these characters and these settings had a place, like we were talking about earlier, about do they play an important part? Understanding that actually the police force then was a little bit suspect. Like we mentioned nowadays, and how they would have favoured very much the aristocracy or the well-doing, or they possibly couldn't have done anything, and how the working classes would have took a lot of blame for anything that would have gone on. So I was trying to get that across as well, without being too political, obviously, because that's not our place to do that.
No, definitely.
So, yeah.
But I'm interested actually, like, because I know I've had this sort of discussion before when it comes to Dickens. He's like you say, not to get too political, but what's interesting is even with that time, like there's correlations you could probably draw to like how things are now at the moment, maybe like economically.
Yeah.
With that world of Dickens, obviously we're not as extreme as that. But
absolutely.
How did you find that the potential similarities between the world of Dickens and the character Dickens? And
that's the part I understood from when writing it. Oh yeah, really, that happened, and you just think, well, some things don't change, do they? So to speak. you can see all these little metaphors coming out and realizing that these things happen to that. That was a quite a simplistic part for me.
With the process, I suppose, of looking at, like when we said about students and young actors, what do you see the value of the classics in terms of their development as young performers? Let's say, well, how do those pieces come in useful to them?
I think it's down to character again. Um, Looking for voice. How do you think the voice would resonate with somebody who's from a particular part of society that wanted to be in a higher part of
Yeah.
society speak? So for Bumble, for instance, is I kind of focused on the actor having a sort of common voice, if you like, but changed it stylistically so that they felt they were part of a much more upper class society. So it was very much um, understanding how the voice and how the body gesture could change from low to high, and hopefully that helps them to understand when they're reading the classics how those characters are developed in text and how they can be developed visually and practically. Not always easy to do, obviously, because they are young people and maybe they haven't even got to the age yet where they're going to be studying that sort of stuff. But it breaks the ice for them, hopefully, and it
Yeah.
gives them an insight into what they might be doing as they develop through their school lives and then into their careers.
Yeah, because I do think it's quite important, especially for those that do want to explore performance. Because, like we said, a lot of television still is either direct adaptations of these classics
Yeah,
or worked from those classics, and a lot of theatre now is still tons of Shakespeare,
yeah,
tons of the kind of restoration comedies, all that
yeah,
kind of stuff.
yeah.
So it can be quite a daunting task, can't it? Like, I'm interested, how did you find approaching these as a student? You know, as a young student yourself, when you were studying this at school, let's say, how did you find approaching them?
Well, it's funny you should say that because I had when I was at school and I was studying Shakespeare and that, I'm going back to the start of our conversation. You'd read it and you think, oh, for
Yeah.
goodness sake, what I don't understand the lingo, don't understand the language. Um, find a, the English teacher say, find a point and prove it. And I'm sure that the guys who do it now, if they juxtapose their having to do that but with practical performance, I'm sure it gets an understanding. Like, for instance, when we go on the road with an inspector calls, for instance, um, that a lot of the guys have done their pre-preparation, but when they're watching our little playlets, our little
Yeah.
scenes, you do get an understanding that they understand it a bit better.
It's crucially important, isn't it? Because here I am, like I said, I'm a huge fan of Shakespeare.
Yeah,
But I remember probably at 13 doing The Tempest, I think, and I've still got a huge block with that play, and it's
yeah,
purely because like approaching it from this purely academic place
yeah,
never really seems to work because, like you say, it's intrinsically built for performance,
yeah.
and like we said, that history. You know, I think what happens a lot of the time is you read these novels, you read these plays, and it feels like very dry
Yeah,
editions of people living in
yeah,
history, whereas you see us perform
yeah. What?
and it
Yeah,
becomes a real drama. It becomes like watching a soap or something
yeah,
like that. You see actually how emotionally
yeah. I mean, I
it
remember on
is.
another
Yeah.
level at university doing Antigone.
All right. Yeah.
Now, if I'd have read that script
Mm.
already, I was going, "What on earth?" But when the director's talking to me about playing Antigone as a dictator,
Yeah.
think of Hitler. I'll get it now. I understand some of the language better now when you're exploring it that way.
Yeah. I always think the complexity comes from the characterization, doesn't it? So
Yeah,
when it is brought to life and it's no longer just essentially factlets that
basically
is
that's what it
churned
is.
out
Yeah,
in
yeah,
education
yeah,
about pieces. When you actually look at, let's say, Mr. Burling,
yes,
who
yeah,
Inspector Calls, and you see this capitalist and how
yeah,
every little phrase that he comes out
yeah,
with
yeah,
doubles up that worldview. I
yes,
think then it becomes something you can actively
yeah,
comment on
yeah, yeah,
rather
yeah,
than just, like you said, dry
absolutely,
words on the
yeah.
page. To help students of that or young performers, What would your toolkit be, I suppose, for deconstructing a classic piece of text?
I like to break the thing down, and I like to do a lot of devising. So we'll have a chat about the characters and the objectives of the storyline, whatever. But I like to break down in little devising sessions and give them a theme, split off into groups and
Yeah.
give them each group a sort of theme, if you like, from what's within the text, what's within the play. And I don't mind them then coming up with a contemporary version, because obviously we do
Yeah.
that. We do contemporary versions of these things and see what they come up with that way. Try to get them to think on the feet and don't get bogged down too much with the academia. And sometimes I don't think there's a right or a wrong. Let's go with the flow first of all. We can always iron out nearer the crunch time. So I do think the actor should have a sense of freedom sometimes, and offer interpretation, and I think that's good for their development as well.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, because I know, sort of moving on to the challenges of working with the classics, working on Twelfth Night last year.
Yeah. Of course.
I know I probably did get too academic. I remember leading a session with the group where it was all about counting the beats and how to break iambic pentameter down.
Yeah.
And of course, that's very technical. And, for anyone working with Shakespeare out there, there's a great book by John Barton, who was like a director at the RSC, called Playing Shakespeare. That's just full of exercises which really break that down. So that's really helpful. But yeah, so I did this session, really, like you say, it's character. It's like, how can we draw these characters closer to you? I know, like, as an actor at drama school, we did a lot of work on the classics, and for me, it was always finding that angle. Who is this character emotionally? What's a really passionate? Like, I worked on Hotspur from Henry IV.
Yeah.
And of course, he's just this raging bull of a character.
Yeah.
So for me, it was about kind of going a bit mental. It was once I found that emotion, that rage.
Yeah.
Then that gave me an access into how does the words actually travel.
Yeah. The other thing which I think is crucial, Matt, is and CYT can't be criticised for any of this, because we do have the offer opportunity to take our young people to the theatre to see productions. That doesn't happen like it used to. I don't know what it's like I know when I was at school, we did have a couple of theatre trips a year. Like you talk about Shakespeare, there are so many different interpretations of Shakespeare, particularly by the 20th century, 21st century directors, that offer a new slant for not only for entertainment purposes, because it is entertainment and education married together, but the kids don't get those opportunities like they used to, and so they're not going to get a clarification of what these works are about.
So you mentioned adaptations. I find this quite interesting because obviously, like you say, a lot of these pieces are performed now, but drawn into totally new settings, periods. Yeah. What do you think is the sort of process for doing that, and what should a director or performer be wary of when taking these pieces out of their original context?
Oh, that's a difficult one. I mean, I personally, I do like modern adaptations. That you're probably, I don't know, I might be wrong.
More, it's a bit of a mix,
bit of a mixture of the conventional and the modern. I like to keep it simple, so I'd like to, like, if we're taking a specific pieces, let's talk about the one that Holly's doing, which is Little Women, which I'm assisting her on. That's going to be very much traditional.
Yeah.
If I was taking a classic myself, I would probably like to do something a bit more contemporary. But the difficulty is, and I'm guessing this is stating the bleeding obvious, but is to maintain or keep sure that you are still paying credence to what the lines are, what the speeches are, what the characters are, what their objectives and their super objectives are. But there's no reason why you can't contemporize that, providing that you don't lose sight of what their originality is, which is a difficult thing to do.
Yeah, I think it's like the key ingredients of the story, isn't it? Because, all these writers, they were geniuses. They immaculately constructed these stories. So I think the danger's always, like, you can move these stories into a modern setting, but if you end up disrupting what the actual framework is inside the story,
It'll blow it all apart.
then it
Yeah.
doesn't make sense
No,
anymore.
no.
Yeah, I know that there is a value in doing it. Like you said, when I did Three Sisters last year,
Yeah.
I knew I had to adapt it because it was like
Yeah.
the original piece that I assumed really that the
Uh,
group at forefront, they weren't going to relate to
Yeah.
an imperialist aristocratic family in
I mean,
early 20th century Russia. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's
well,
better to bring it here.
yeah, the thing
Yeah.
with the Dickens thing, there's so many different characters, and you're thinking, well, really, I can't afford to miss anything out here. But
No.
you've got to be ruthless in your own mind. You're working to a time frame of the actual production. I'm thinking, as long as I get across, making sure I get across a lot of the characters and their individual traits and how they would knit into a storyline. I think that's important, or that was important. Without, like you say, without losing the framework.
Moving on to sort of modern pieces, we are seeing that kind of influence still drag through. Like this is a totally mentioned, but like Bridgerton is huge, and that's very much drawing from a lot of those classic pieces and how
Absolutely,
it's
yeah.
constructed.
It's like a sort of montage, isn't it, of those period pieces.
And it's become really popular, hasn't it? Like I know, obviously the Pole Dog's probably
Pole Dog was the other one I was just going to say.
and that whole book series. I still want to do the last 6 books.
Yeah.
They are brilliant. And I read an interesting book actually. No, an interesting play recently actually. Mike Bartlett.
Yeah.
Who I don't know if you have come across any of his works.
Not happened particularly, no.
But he does a lot of stuff. So I read The 47th, which is all about Donald Trump.
Okay.
And he did a play, King Charles III. And what was interesting is he's done these plays obviously about very modern times, but he's written them as Shakespeare plays. So they're all written in verse and couplets. And I read another one he did called Scandal Town, which is based on Restoration comedies. And it's staged as such, but it's all about like, the modern left versus right argument kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that a lot of modern pieces are drawing off these pieces, really. So to bring it to our key question, why shouldn't we just move forward? And we've got loads of great new writers, loads of great new pieces. Why shouldn't we just move forward, focusing on them? Why do we have to still keep going back?
Well, I think there's a lot in life today that we tend to discard, and unfortunately, I think you can't. It's funny you should ask this, Matt, because I was in Waterstone's bookshop the other day, and I was actually looking for, because somewhere in my house I have a second edition copy of A Wind in the Willows, the children's book. And I'm going all around looking at the children's sections, looking for this particular book. And I'm looking at stuff by Terry Pratchett, David Walliams, all these, great writers in their standing, but I still need to see where their influences have come from. And I couldn't find the book that I was after at all. And I just think that's a sort of a simpler answer to your question, but I think these writers today, no matter how good, they still are influenced by what's gone in the past. And I think we have to understand the past, whatever it might be, to create for the future. And I'm sure both of us are sort of, you particularly, have a greater understanding of how the old works can be even sort of recreated for a modern audience and how they can be redeveloped. And I think that's vitally important. And in any case, budgets prevailing, I think still those dramas are still required or wanted by audiences because they still get great numbers.
Yeah, I think like as young artists, it's imperative that you have an understanding, don't you, of like what is the development of theatre and development of literature, rather than just look
particularly
at what's
Renaissance drama. You know, one of my favourite films, Get Carter, that borrows from all that sort of literature. You know, stuff like that. You know, the murderous intent. It's all in there. Particularly how many gangster films borrow from all that sort of genre. Of course, they do. And the other thing, of course, is supposedly one of the big genres is musical theatre, and they're always borrowing from past texts and reinventing it for whether it be a jukebox musical or a properly crafted musical.
That's also done a really nice way. A few years back when I was on tour, I read Les Mis.
Yeah.
And it's huge. It's a huge novel.
Yeah.
And in some ways, you look at the musical and go, "This is probably more effective. This
Yeah.
really highlights the story
Yeah.
without all the kind of overly verbose,
Yeah,
Victor
absolutely.
Hugo
Yeah, of
narrative."
course,
Yeah.
Well, that's right. I mean, well, we're talking obviously. I mean, how many of look at the adaptations of Dickens has been phenomenal.
Yeah, Stephen Knight does a lot of them now.
Stephen Knight does a lot of them.
Plus, it's always good to play on them, isn't it? But they're always still there. I think.
Yeah.
Hopefully, definitely made the argument that there's still a place for
I would think so. Absolutely. Yeah.
So we'll close with two final questions for you. Which writers particularly inspired you in your sort of journey as a creative?
I'm a particular fan of Edgar Allan Poe. I like all that sort of gothic detection stuff, and I like the stuff that other people have taken from his works and theatricalised them, particularly Berkoff's adaptation of The Fall of the House of Usher is a big thing with me. I mentioned influence. I mentioned The Wind in the Willows earlier. I do like the way some children's writers store, their stories. So Kenneth Grahame was a big influence of mine as well. And I like other playwrights like Stoppard. I quite like. So yeah, those are my sort of general influences. Yeah.
And finally, is there a classic piece of literature you'd like to work on next or adapt?
I'd like to do well, I don't know whether I think you'd probably be more akin to doing this. I'd like to do a really sort of modern day political version of Julius Caesar.
Oh
yeah. I would like to do that. So you'll have to give me some ideas, Matt.
Yeah, we'll get talking about it.
Yeah.
Lovely. Well, thank you, Simon, for talking to us.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was quite a nice highbrow discussion for us all for this new episode. Please like, follow, subscribe, comment. Let us know what you think of what we've discussed. If you've got any thoughts on any classics you like that you'd like to see us do, that would be great. We'd love hearing from you. Hopefully see you soon for the next episode, and have a great week.